Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa salli ala Rasulil Kareem amma ba'd. We started off with Surah Luqman. Surah Luqman, it focuses on the story of Luqman the wise and his advice to his son. Now, Luqman, whether he was a prophet or whether he was a wise individual, this was a debate amongst the scholars. But they all agreed that he was a wise man who was also known to the Arabs. So the Arabs of Mecca, of Hijaz, they knew who Luqman the wise was because he was the subject, his advice was the subject of many of their advices that they used to have. So they used to take from his advice and they used to go ahead and put it in their anecdotes and into their shi'r and so on. So in this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is reminding these Arabs that Luqman, he was a muwahhid, he was a monotheist, and his advice to his son was the same as the message of Islam. And so the passage that contains Luqman's advice to his son, we should all go ahead and actually study it. Not only read it and read the translation, but actually study the tafsir and what the scholars have derived, the many benefits that they did from these few verses. And also as parents, we should go ahead and learn what was and how did he give this advice to his son, so that way we can implement it within our teaching to our children as well. Now, Luqman, he taught his son 4 or 5 main things, and that was concentrated in Surah Luqman, and that was Tawheed, the worship, the obedience to one Allah, humility, especially to one's parents, Salah, to establish the Salah on time, to have patience, and to have moderation, especially when it comes to us walking and carrying ourselves and the way we talk as well. There's one verse in Surah Luqman that I would just like to derive some fiqhi benefit from, and that is the verse 14, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ وَهْنًا عَلَى وَهْنٍ وَفِصَالُهُ فِي عَامَيْنِ أَنِ اشْكُرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيْكَ إِلَيَّ الْمَصِيرُ. And we have enjoined upon man to care for his parents. His mother carried him weakness upon weakness, and his weaning meaning his breastfeeding, was for 2 years. In Surah Al-Ahqaf, which is chapter 46, about 15 surahs later, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions, وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ إِحْسَانًا حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ كُرْهًا وَوَضَعَتْهُ كُرْهًا وَحَمْلُهُ وَفِصَالُهُ 30 شهرًا. And we have enjoined upon man that to his parents he should have good treatment. His mother carried him with hardship and gave birth to him with hardship, and his bearing and his weaning is for 30 months. So in Surah Luqman, 2 years, i.e. 24 months. In Surah Al-Ahqaf, it is 30 months. What is the difference? Why 24 months there, or 2 years, and 30 months here? The scholars, when they looked at it, the benefit that they got, and subhanAllah, this has so much ramification, especially when it comes to lineage, especially when it comes to the issue of zina, especially when it comes to parentage and lineage. The scholars, they mention in Surah Luqman, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions that his weaning is for 2 years. And in Surah Al-Ahqaf, both his the mother carrying the baby as well as his weaning is for 30 months. And therefore they said the minimum, aqallul haml, the minimum pregnancy is 6 months. Meaning, if a woman was to get married and after 6 months or more she gave birth, the child is to be given the right, or the child is to be attributed to lil firash, to the matrimonial bed. But if it is less than 6 months, even if a person does DNA test shar'an, this child is not going to belong This child is not going to belong to the husband of the wife. Now in Surah As-Sajdah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also, He mentions very strong reminders about the tawheed of Allah, about the oneness of Allah, and the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that exist all around us. And throughout the surah, Allah, He is reminding us of these powerful proof of His existence, and He is calling upon all of us to worship. And even we made the sajda because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions certain people, تَتَجَافَى جُنُوبُهُمْ عَنِ الْمَضَاجِعِ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِعُونَ. That Allah, He tells us that there are two types of people. One are the believers who believe in Him and they pray to Him in tahajjud. They forsake their bed and they call upon Him both in fear and in aspiration. Allah, He says that these are the people, أَمَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ جَنَّاتُ الْمَأْوَى نُزُلًا بِمَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. That for these people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them the Jannah as their refuge, as a place for their accommodation because of what they used to do. And then the other type of people that Allah, He mentions in the surah, وَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فَسَقُوا فَمَأْوَاهُمُ النَّارُ كُلَّمَا أَرَادُوا أَنْ يَخْرُجُوا مِنْهَا أُعِيدُوا فِيهَا وَقِيلَ لَهُمْ ذُوقُوا عَذَابَ النَّارِ الَّذِي كُنْتُمْ بِهِ تُكَذِّبُونَ. But as for those people who defiantly disobeyed Allah, their refuge is going to be in the fire. Every time they wish to get out of the fire, they are going to be returned. They are going to be returned to it. And for such people, Allah, He says that in this world, وَلَنُذِيقَنَّهُم مِّنَ الْعَذَابِ الْأَدْنَى دُونَ الْعَذَابِ الْأَكْبَرِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. That He's going to make them taste some form of punishment, some disasters, some calamities, maybe a loss of health, a loss of wealth, some pressure from here, some anxiety from there, some form of worldly punishment in order for them to taste the bigger punishment that is awaiting for them. Why is Allah doing this? Allah, He is doing this because He is trying to have mercy upon these individuals and say, watch out. The punishment of the hereafter is far more worse than the punishment that you are going through in this world. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. So that way you can come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Allah, He starts Surah Al-Ahzab. This is an amazing verse. Allah, He's telling the Prophet, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّبِيِّ اتَّقِ اللَّهِ. SubhanAllah, this is a powerful verse. Allah, He's telling the Prophet, have the taqwa of Allah. Is there a bigger muttaqi besides the Prophet of Allah? There is no bigger muttaqi. A person who was conscious and fearful of Allah than the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and all the other prophets. Ya Allah, He is telling him, Ya ayyuhan nabiyyu taqillaha wa la tuti'il kafirina wal munafiqin. Allah is saying, have taqwa. And then towards the end of the surah, Allah, He is telling us all, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu ittaqullaha wa qulu qawlan sadida. O you who believe, all of you have the taqwa of Allah and say a truthful, a solid word. When you're going to speak, then you speak with truth, with firmness. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is reminding us that part of the taqwa is يُصْلِحْ لَكُمْ أَعْمَالَكُمْ وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُمْ. To go ahead and rectify your affairs, your good deeds, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can forgive you. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to rectify all of our affairs, both in this world and in the hereafter. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us for all of our major and minor sins. May Allah make us from amongst the muttaqeen and the muhsineen and the mu'mineen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and our family members from the hellfire and give us entrance into al-firdaus al-a'la. مع النبيين والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين وحسن أولئك رفيقا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.